Hello again. I'm Kenny Fikes, your host of iKnowMedia's Roundtable, where we bring you conscientious clarity through empirical experience alongside both reasoned application and analysis. And so tonight we're bringing you a show to talk about a little bit of a hodgepodge of things that have been going on. We started our show 17 shows ago on July 1st, talking about basically something's going on. How you doing today, Jay?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I had a great weekend. How are you?
I am wonderful, wonderful. So you rode out the storm okay down there in Houston?
You know what? Where I live in Houston, it was sunny the whole time.
Wow,
We were northwest of all of that, so we were pretty blessed.
gotcha.
It's been calm. Good to be here though. So
Okay.
I'm Jay, by the way, everyone, if you don't know me, I'm Jay. I have three children. I am a physician and a disability advocate. And, I'm trying to learn what I can do to help our country be a little bit stronger, a little bit more cohesive, and to strengthen the voice of those who are oppressed.
Gotcha. Elisa Simmons, how are you doing up there in Tyler, Texas?
I'm doing well, thank you. Hey guys, I'm Elisa Simmons, and the hurricane missed us and caused my area to be cool. So it was kind of a blessing for our space. I'm excited for tonight's talk, but I'm a little drained that we keep having to have talks like this.
Gotcha. Well, I think it's inevitable for a while, but as I've said on other shows, we are trying to take our proverbial little bite out of this elephant by continuing the conversation because we don't want it to just go away like it did so many times after all of the names that can be said that have been killed vis-a-vis police brutality, overreactions, etc. With that, segueing into today's show, this idea that people say all lives matter, which clearly all lives do matter. Now, I don't believe, in fact, I don't know a single person in my life that I respect and love or I'm friends with who doesn't believe all lives matter. Yet, just as when there are, and certainly I would not make an analogy between Black folks and animals, but only the sake of extinction. When we find species in nature that are on the extinct list, what happens is there are special measures taken to save those species. When there are elephants that are being poached for their ivory, there's certain laws that are enacted and money spent and things done to try and turn that thing around. No one all of a sudden says, well, alligators matter too, because the alligators aren't in danger. So may be silly, but to me, this conversation we continue to have is almost silly on its face. And so when people say all lives matter, they're hiding behind the idea of, it's hard to argue that all lives matter, but they're hiding behind that because they don't really want to deal with Black Lives Matter. They don't want to talk about what's difficult, or they're in denial. So, there's evidence, hundreds of years of evidence to support that Black lives need to have some specific action taken in terms of protecting young Black men, particularly. There's a lesson in it. There's volumes and volumes over hundreds of years in this country. And for whatever reason, I won't say for whatever reason. We know why. A lot of it's on video nowadays, and so we're starting to see it. So I won't ramble about that. Jay, why don't you start us off and kind of talk about that a little bit?
You know what? It's interesting that you would compare that to how we look at animals and when they are becoming extinct, because the situation there is that the animals are all valued. Like someone has decided that in order for the animal planet and the animal world to be in balance, you need to have all these species there. So I think the unfortunate thing is that that's not how America really looks at people of color. That's not how America really looks at people from different countries, from certain countries, people with disabilities, people who have different gender identity. America does not look at it like we need all of these people to be here and to create this balance in this wonderful ecosystem. Therefore, endangered lives are not being protected like they should be. I think when it comes to all lives matter, I sent out a meme that I saw on Facebook, and I wish I could remember what it says, but it's something to this effect. It basically suggests that, all lives matter. However, when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, they weren't talking about all lives, right? And our history hasn't supported that they were ever talking about all lives. Black people were 3/5 of a man, and laws were allowed and enacted in which didn't have to act like their lives mattered. They were beasts of burden. And the interesting thing is that being beasts of burden, they were still mistreated. Like you think you would want to take care of that thing that's making your money for you, right? But that's not even how it was looked at. And the family didn't matter. The family unit didn't matter. The health really of the individual didn't matter. They needed to be big and strong. And as long as they showed that they could get the work done, they weren't going to be treated in any special way. They were going to have to just be sick and get well, be injured and get well, and get up every day and go do what you have to do. But there was no value ever placed on them. And I think it's ironic to me that we keep having to have that discussion, that people don't think back historically to see that America has not ever sent a message that says that Black lives matter. Not ever.
Right. So it's people, again, they want to sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't matter and sort of hoodwink us with Christianity. And I am a Christian, but the way it's used sort of hoodwink us with Christianity and say we're all brothers and sisters and forget about it, and I don't have anything to do with the past. What do you got, Elisa?
In the situations like this, I find myself in this, and I know there's other people in situations similar to me. I get to move fluidly between worlds and between exposures that a lot of white people who don't have a heavy base with as far as family or friends connections that are Black or brown in some shade. And then I have, a lot of people who are white. And so I get to move in between these worlds and see firsthand. And that's what I try so hard. And I'm so frustrated that I constantly am having to say, Jacob could have been Thomas. He could have been my husband. He could have been my son. And I'm constantly having to tell this to white people who value my husband and value my son, but they can't go past their level, their area of comfort, and they don't see that this could be an issue. And it's just so aggravating. It's what I'm having one of those weekends where dealing with this situation is infuriating, and it's my ability to filter is broken. And it's because I'm so sick of having to try to convince people how real this issue is.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And so while we still have Black people, mainly Black men, being shot and killed in the back by police officers, the bad ones, right? I also believe this, let me throw this piece in. I think we have a rampant problem with law enforcement and young Black men, or Black men in general. But I also believe, I haven't seen a study, but my gut tells me, my empirical experience tells me that if we were to do a study, sort of making up a number, so plus or minus a few percentage points, if we were to do a study of all of these incidents across the country and over the last 10, 15, 20 years, we would probably find that the offenders, as far as the police officers go, are the same guys over and over again. I don't think it's across the board, but we talked about qualified immunity before. And I would believe that, 3 guys out of 100 are the same ones every time that are committing these atrocious acts. Now, and so while it's not as degrading as it used to be, I mean, death is death and it's degrading in any case, any way, shape, or form. I know I make some weird analogies sometimes, but being shot isn't quite being whipped to death or being hung or being tarred and feathered or being dragged by a car. But so many things and more have happened to Black men in this country, yet it's still happening, but we're getting it on video. There are things that we've never heard of happening. I haven't. Please correct me if you guys have. I've never heard of a white person being dragged behind a car till death. I've never heard of a white woman's house being busted into by police officers and shot and killed. I've just never heard of these things. I've never seen a 14-year-old white female on the ground in her bikini outside of Austin, Texas, with a grown man, Black police officer holding her down and his knee in her back. Those things just do not happen to white people because it goes back to that 3/5 of a person. You're considered to be somewhere inherently between a man and an ape at 3/5 of the person. And that is still practiced today. What do you got, Jay?
Absolutely. I think that not only were we not considered whole people, but we were considered animalistic, and we still are. You know, one of the rationales for slavery and for continuing it was that we were too stupid to take care of ourselves. We were incapable. We were beast-like, and we needed to be controlled. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that thinking still exists today. It may not be as extreme, but there's an assumption that we are very animalistic, that we're always going to be. And I think that that's one of the big problems that occurs, is that particularly for people who, you know, Elisa just described a subset of people who have such little interaction with people of color, they don't know anything about them. So all that they know are the stereotypes that they've heard or the things that their family members have said. And then when you have either a media or in this case, an administration that plays to the fears of those people, those long-standing fears, you get things like this. I mean, even in slavery, they were afraid. They were afraid of revolts. They were afraid of Black people becoming out of control. And maybe that was because to some extent they understood that they were mistreating them. I'm not sure. But that was one of the reasons they cited for having to, you know, keep everybody under control. Because my God, what would happen if you let the niggers go free? And that was how they looked at it. And I don't think a lot of that thinking has changed. That's also why some people are so astounded when they meet a person of color who has finished college and who's articulate, like we've discussed. And you know, how'd you get that car? And wow, you take so many trips abroad, like, wow. You know, I think because it's still surprising to people, despite the fact that we can turn on TV channels and we now see many more Black people on TV. We see many more Black people in leadership roles. For God's sake, we've had a Black president, but there are some people in white America who still find it remarkable and amazing that we have done anything constructive with our lives.
Well, yeah, that is pretty amazing. And it is interesting that people still live in a bubble and can actually believe that. But quite frankly, most of America is not college educated. Most of America does not travel abroad. And so what happens is people are surprised that Black people have access to things. Well, actually, white people are surprised that Black people have access to things that they don't. And quite frankly, institutionalization is really, really strong. There are lots of Black people who look at other Black folks like you or me and say, how do you do that? Or how did you get that? Or et cetera. But the difference is, even though they institutionalize to believe that maybe they should have a Jewish lawyer, or maybe they should have a white doctor. It's true, institutionalization is strong. I've got to call it what it is, but they're not going to go out and treat other Black people as less than in terms of degrading their lives personally. They're just not exposed, just like many white people aren't exposed. What do you got, Elisa?
I think that we have to work on because as much as we know this, I think there are a lot of white people who don't, we were talking about this a few shows ago where we talked about unconscious biases. A lot of white people don't realize that when you say, oh, my daughter's been to Spain, or, you know, we've done this, when they're shocked, they don't associate that shock with the fact that they're shocked because you're Black. They don't make that connection. They're not, countless times I've talked to white people about different life scenarios, and I'm baffled, and I'm like, do you realize you just made that assumption based off of their skin color, or based off their religion, or based off their economic status? And they're like, no, I didn't. I was just shocked. And it's like, well, why were you shocked? And getting them to get that connection back, because at a certain point we got to stop giving the benefit. We've got to stop saying, well, it's because of lack of, I agree it's lack of exposure, but at what point do you not get that as your crutch anymore? You've got pull them up by your bootstraps. You're taking away a crutch because you feel like it's victimizing. Well, what are you doing when you pretend that it's not? You're not judging men based on you find Black men aggressive. identify why you find black men aggressive. You don't find black men aggressive because as the infant, you knew black men were aggressive. You find black men aggressive because that's what's been shoved down your throat. The history books constantly are saying black men are aggressive. Here's the signs. And when, if you really pay attention to history, black men are not aggressive. The most dangerous person in world history are men of European descent. That's the most dangerous people in world history. But we buy into the concept that black men are dangerous, black men are criminals, because you see it on TV. Cops, that TV show Cops in the 80s my parents didn't allow me to watch it. The majority of that show would be black men doing crazy stuff and getting arrested. And it was like, if that's your only, what? And in books, in movies, how many times are we going to have the same movie where the black guy is a drug dealer that's trying to go good, and then he loses the money, so he's got to go back and sell drugs, or the black woman is trying to do, like, and that's the movie that you tend to watch. And if that's your only exposure, of course that's what you think. And so it's like, wake up. Like, as white people, you got to wake up and realize that this issue is being perpetuated because of your ignorance, not black people's. I'm gonna get on a rant.
You just threw a lot of things in there to unpack. I'm going to address a few things. One goes back to what Jay Cherie said, and then this circuitous thing of trying to go right, the former drug dealer, because that's actually a reality. But the system is built on that.
Yes.
So Jay Cherie talked about people saying that, they thought that maybe black folks were not capable of taking care of themselves. There's a narrative today where you hear some people in places like Fox News who have actually said things like black folks were better off during slavery. And so I don't think they said these words, but what I hear from that is, there were three it's ridiculous. There were 3 square meals a day. They had a roof over their head, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, versus some of the things happening now. It's insane. But that movie, Birth of a Nation, I never saw the recent version. There was one released again in the last few years. But in a film class in high school, which is years and years and years ago, I saw the original Birth of a Nation. And that propaganda to perpetuate the oversexed nature and the danger of the black man and the white damsel in distress, and these guys doing reconstruction in the state houses, eating chicken with their feet up on the desk and all this crazy stuff. It was literally cast upon the nation as some sort of reality. And if you think about, I like to say this thing in a positive way about taking proverbial bites out of the elephant. Instead of blasting that movie across the nation, what you have is, for example, if you look at the Republican National Convention, you take these little pieces, and you add them all together, and they're perpetuating the same thing, right? They're perpetuating the same thing. And so these ideas and ideals that black folks are dangerous, less than, et cetera, you have them constantly. Even in my lifetime, literally in my lifetime, my children have a hard time believing it, but when I was 10 or 11 or 12, you didn't see black people on TV. The only people you saw were like the pimp, Huggy Bear on Starsky and Hutch, or a prostitute. Hey, baby, that's all you saw. Or else the most sort of positive role was like a screaming, yelling, mad police captain. Like, we could be that. And that was about it. And so the other thing we talk about with crime, right? Boys will be boys is sort of what happens with white teenagers. Oh, he was just being a boy. Even a grown president at 70-something years old can say, grab him by the peas, and they'll say, oh, that's just locker room talk, right? Yeah. But let a black kid do those things, and it's sort of like, you know what? We're going to nip this in the bud because he's an animal and he's a criminal, and we're not going to unleash him on society. So when he gets that 3rd strike for driving without a license, we're going to send him up the road for 5 years. So there's a lot of stuff in there. I'll come back later and try to remember that circle thing. What do you got, Jay?
I think that it even goes back to, we look at literature and we look at television and we look at allegory, right? Because you have black versus white, and black is always associated with the bad guy. If you watch cartoons when we were kids or Westerns, the outlaw has on black or has a black mask, and the person who's there to save the day is the white knight, right? And so there's always this indoctrination that you aren't even aware of, because there aren't too many things that are positive that the color black is associated with. It's darkness, it's ignorance, it's frightening. People are afraid of the dark, right? So you kind of always have these these kind of notions that we just grow up seeing and inadvertently kind of taking on. I think even sometimes as Black people, we take on some of that, you know, and we do. We may not even realize that we do. And we end up feeling inferior, and our behavior follows, because that is the attitude that we have because we've been so well indoctrinated. And even when we become aware of it, we still have to do a whole lot of assessment and become self-aware. Like, why do I think what I'm thinking? Why do I mean, you know, I'm gonna call it out, right? We're supposed to, we try to be tactful, but let's call it out. You guys both know that there are Black people who will not frequent a Black-owned business. Just won't do it. Because they're going to assume that the Black business is not going to have their business in order. They're going to be late. They're not going to follow protocols and processes. It's going to be shoddy. And so we do that to one another, you know, and we've been so well indoctrinated to hate ourselves. And so when it's that deep, like, what can we really expect from white America? We can't still get it together to love ourselves enough to say, yeah, I'm going to support that Black business. Why not? Right? But we don't think twice too often before walking into a white establishment. Maybe we check Yelp, maybe we don't. You know, maybe we ask somebody for a recommendation, maybe we don't. But we kind of are more inclined to give the white business the benefit of the doubt, that they know what they're doing, they're going to treat us well, our money will be well spent, we're going to get a quality product, and that's what we sashay into the white establishment and spend our bucks. And that's how we look at it.
Well, and that goes back to something I mentioned on the last show, the show before. You're going to have good and bad everywhere, but the problem is, because we're indoctrinated as well, we do the same thing that white people do to us, unfortunately, which is this. You go into a Black establishment that's no good, and you assume that now Black establishments are no good. You go into a white establishment that's no good, you just go, that was a bad establishment. A little humor, you guys know who Don D.C. Carey is? He's a comedian. So in the movies Friday, Day Day, he was Day Day's dad. He's a comedian. But anyway, he does this little bit about Black restaurants, and he's saying, why is I'm at the fly's table, or is the fly at my table? Why do I have to walk through the kitchen to get to the bathroom? Why doesn't the cook not have a net? Why doesn't the screen door have a screen on it? He does this whole thing, and it's just hilarious. Yeah. So on that Lives Matter thing, here's a point I want to make as well. Black Lives Matter isn't just about shooting someone in the back or having a knee on their neck. It is, I'm gonna say this word, and then I'm gonna try to remember to tell my friend Kevin Dunham to watch this, because he said this to me my son was born in 1992 in Philadelphia at HUP, Hospital University of Pennsylvania. And at the time, my wife and I, at the time, Miles' mother, we had a car that had been stolen a few months before it was time for birth. So I needed a ride to go to the hospital and to come back. And Kevin was the person who drove us home. And I'll never forget this. I was having a professional issue downtown Philly. And I thought, man, you know, I'm a young guy with a new baby. You know, you would think that they think about our family or something like that. Like, if you're messing with me, you're messing with me and my family, my young son. And Kevin Dunham said these words to me. He's penned he graduated before we got there, class of 89, but I became friends with him because he said, Kenny, they don't care about your nigga, baby. And I went, wow. And it shocked me. So what he was saying very directly was this, and I experienced it later in life. When a white man is 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, and he has a family to take care of, and things are going sort of okay at work or not so well, they don't just fire that man, because they consider his wife, they consider his children. If he has grandchildren, they consider his grandchildren, because those lives matter. When a Black man, I'm talking about men, it's the same with women. When a Black man isn't perfect at that same scenario, they're quick to give him a hard time, write him up, get ready to fire him, because they don't give a damn about his family. They don't care about that. His family is a consequence of whatever they feel like doing to him. And Black Lives Matters means that too. When a city doesn't want to give a Black company a contract and try to keep them out, they don't give a damn about that man or that woman's family or their life or their business and those kids and his mortgage. Black Lives Matter is about more than being shot in the back. Those things matter. Who's next?
Well, you know what? I think when Jay was talking about the Black people, because I know that I have family members that when I referred a handyman to them, and are one of the greatest guys I know with their hands happens to be Black, and they walk and they're like, really? Now you gonna have to come over and fix it this weekend. You know you are. And I'm like, what? Like, this is my guy. This is who I go to. And I think that if identifying, I'm trying my hardest how to figure out how to translate or decode racism or pre-existing biases for the people I need to identify it with. So a lot of my family members. But we do that. We do it across the board. Who do you want to do your nails? We all know who you want you to do your nails. You want an Asian chick to come do your nails. Who do you want to cut your yard? We all know who you want. You want somebody of Hispanic descent to come cut your yard. Who do you want to do your hair? Like, you want a woman to do your hair. A man wants a man to do their hair. My husband, you know, his barbershop is all Black. A white guy is probably not going to come into his barbershop because he wants a white guy to cut his hair. Like, we all have these pre-existing things that make these thoughts that we've been conditioned to go based off of what you see on TV, what you see in movie, what you see in the community around you. And even if you don't want to say it's specifically because it's racism, you need to identify that it's because of biases, and you need to ask yourself, are they fair? Is it fair that you're pushing these on people? And also, in reality, like taking a job away from someone because you're not comfortable with a Black contractor, or he doesn't have as much experience, or, you know, all the stupid lines that we come around, you know, we take back, we justify it with. If those are your truths, that you really feel that way, you need to have a moment with yourself, or you need to have a moment with your closest friends who will call you on your bullshit. And you need to be like, hey, I just realized I did not give this guy a contract because something about him made me uncomfortable. Like, and you have to start practicing undoing this stuff that is not natural. Like, we're not supposed to do this to each other, and you got to start unpacking. Like, you've got to get rid of it. And I think that's what's just so frustrating and overwhelming right now, is because it's like you're hitting your head against a wall. Like, when I have to explain that it does not matter if Jacob had a knife in Wisconsin, it doesn't matter. He was shot in the back. What threat was he in when his back was turned to you? Like, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter his criminal history. All that matters is that in that moment of 7 shots, his back was turned to you. That's all that matters. And then when you take the contrast of the 17-year-old and how he was treated, in the last week, I've had a handful of people tell me that man it didn't matter that his back was turned because he was a criminal. It didn't matter that his back was turned because he had a knife in the car. So the police reacted because of that. But you have I'm about to go. You have a 17-year-old man who's walking down the street with a gun in his hand, with his hands up, and you have people yelling that he just shot people, and you tell him to get out of the street. Like, look at this and see it for what it is. And you don't have to get offended. You don't have to act like you were the ones who shot Jacob in the back, but you need to accept that it happens. And yeah. I think, go Kenny, cut me off, Kenny.
No worries, not cutting you off. So some, you know, so there's systemic racism, there's institutional racism, you know, there's institutionalization. There are things that you know, there's PTSD by Black folks. I call it post-traumatic slave disorder. But I wonder about some of the conversations you have with some of the people you have. You know, if you have to explain to someone that, I mean, God bless them, right? You know, if it's your family member or someone you've known since a little kid and you're friends with them, great. But I don't want to dismiss human beings, but if you've got to explain to someone that it was not okay to shoot a guy in the back and there's no excuse for that, and, you know, outside of the fact that you can see the AR-15 that he's reaching for, and you don't know if he can spin around faster than Speedy Gonzalez and shoot you, outside of that, I mean, any excuse is just flat out racism. That's all it is. And the person that you have to have that conversation with, you are not going to turn them. Sorry to tell you, you're not going to turn them. So, like, I don't know what, I mean, you might spend your time better doing something else, but I'm just wondering, but you know, it's not going to happen. You think about the Kenosha shooter, like you said, they went past this guy. He became an ally to them almost, right? So think about the idea that Black people are stopped and checked for licenses randomly to see if they have license to operate a car. White men walk around this country with assault rifles and no one stops to say, hey, do you have a license for that rifle? Do you have a carry permit? That's something I wonder about. I haven't heard about that happening. They just walk around with them. You know, really seriously deadly weapons. But people look like me get stopped just for driving. What do you
And
got,
that's
Jay?
what, when people discuss the Wisconsin thing, I think that's like that. I look him in the face. I'm like, but that little boy couldn't have a gun. It was illegal. The moment he brandished a weapon was illegal because his age said he cannot own that gun. So if you're going to criminalize. Like, let's do it all over the board. The little boy's mama should be. Go, y'all. I'm gonna cuss in a minute.
I mean, you know, the basic problem is that they just don't see the humanity in people of color. That's what it comes down to. So when someone doesn't see your humanity, they don't care if you lose a job. They don't care if your family has food or not. They don't care if they vote for a president who's outwardly racist and cruel. They don't care about any of that. It doesn't even occur to them that that you may have needs, and even if you do, well, so what? Because again, you know, there's no inherent value in you. And so, yeah, it's not just about getting shot at all. It's not just about being killed. It's about how people have to live. It's why there are inequities in school districts that are in predominantly Black or predominantly of color neighborhoods. It is why, you know, people just don't have the same opportunities when it comes to jobs because people are not seen as human beings. And therefore, their counterparts, white counterparts, cannot relate to them and the pain that they might feel, and they just really don't care. I think, too, you see this carried out, like even with our international policy. Listen, we're quick to invade countries that seem to be, you know, rife with all kinds of human rights violations, right? But we don't get up into Africa. We will go there and exploit their natural resources as much as we can, right? Their diamonds, their cobalt, all of that. But we don't really care when they are mistreating citizens there. We don't care if there are corrupt governments. We don't care if there are coups. We don't care about the Boko Haram and what they did to those girls. We don't care about any of that. We are not going into Africa to start a war because they need to treat people better. So, I mean, you know, when you see disasters in other nations, you know, you see the Facebook posts and you see everybody's got the flag up for that country that had the problem. That doesn't often happen for African nations, right? Because we just don't see the value in a Black life, whether it is American or not. And therefore, that notion is pervasive through everything that we do. And I think people are not aware. When you point out the discrepancies, they feel a little confused, but I think they're not even aware. You know, and so for the people who don't consider themselves overtly racist, those who don't call Black people names, they really are shocked. Like, well, what do you mean? You know, because they don't understand that there are all these microaggressions that they commit routinely, and they're committed because in the backs of their minds they do not see the humanity in a person of color.
So here's a great example of Black lives don't matter and white lives do. I forgot the years, but I remember vividly like it was yesterday, and generally I remember years. So the former Yugoslavia, when it split up and there was an ethnic cleansing with the, you know, it became Croatia and Serbia, and the Muslims and et cetera, and there was that serious genocide. I recall watching the world news and thinking and saying to some people around me, I think there were Black and white people around me at the time, and it seemed like no one saw what I saw. And I thought, guys, do you recognize what's been happening in South Africa for years and years and years, and Black babies and women killed and all this stuff? It's terrible in the shanty towns. And the minute they showed white, which is a tragedy, they show white babies killed in Serbia and Croatia, the US got it together, got with NATO and the allies, and went into that place and basically cleaned it up because white lives matter. And they'd watched this kind of genocide in South Africa for years and years and years, and would always say, well, it's not the right time. And they talk about the politics and not getting so involved in sovereign nations. And I remember I used to say to people, if I'm kicking your ass right now, you want me to stop now or at the right time? And no one had a right answer for that. But that was the answer for South Africa, at the right time politically. But as soon as they saw white children and women killed in the former Yugoslavia, action was taken. What do you got, Elisa?
History. It's because if you look at how world history is taught in America, if you look at how world history was taught in America, Africa is insignificant. Africa has no major role in history classes unless you choose to seek out a higher or more explained history lesson. If you look at the maps, look at how colonized our maps are. Majority of school maps, the equator is dropped so that, and it's done on purpose. It's done so that Europe seems to be centered and predominantly bigger, and Africa's down below it. Russia fits into Africa, but when you look at most maps, Russia is bigger than Africa. And it's like, how is that possible? Russia fits inside of the continent of Africa. This weekend, I was speaking with a friend of mine. She's fabulous. And she was talking about small little towns. You don't have Chinatown, LA, LA, all the bigger cities will have Chinatown, Little Italy, all these little boroughs. And then she said, you don't have a little Africa. And that is the explanation of American history, because she was identifying countries, Italy, China, as little places. But when we talked about little Africa, it was the whole continent. We don't shove down the throats of people that math came from Africa. We don't shove down the throats of people the history of Africa. Most people's extent of African history is Egypt and the pyramids, slaves. That's most of the, in my opinion, most of America's education when it comes to the continent of Africa, let alone specific countries in Africa. And so you don't matter. You don't matter. If you're from Africa, if your descent's from Africa, you don't matter, because history tells us repeatedly you don't matter. And so we got to do better. You need to step up and educate yourself better on this topic.
Well, here's another thing in that. You talked about Chinatown or Little Italy or Russia. So those are nations, right? Africa has been so insignificant that we lump it all together, right?
Yes.
Do you know how many people in this country believe that Africa is a country, not a continent made up of multiple countries? And so that's why Malcolm X and so many Black Muslims are X, because we can't identify where we come from. So that's why we're African Americans. We're not Cameroonian Americans. We're not Ivory Coast Americans. We're not, Nigerian Americans. We're not
Ethiopian.
Nigerian. We're not those things, because people just think Africa is one big continent made up of insignificant Black people. Now, with that said, they did give us some history growing up. I mean, you saw Bugs Bunny and the really dark-faced people with the white lips and the bones in their noses, and the kids saw that. We got to see that. And then we also got to see the white Tarzan and Jane and Boy, and how he sort of ruled the animals and the jungle. So, they gave us some history.
What they wanted, Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple had the whole maroon birthday party on an island full of blackface.
There you go. And they all wanted her, probably. What's up, Jay Cherie?
That's funny you said that. I'm sure like every movie we've ever seen about Egypt, they all have British accents. I'm like, why is that? Why? How does that happen? But I mean, but what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? So in order to tell the history, you have to value the people. You have to value the life and the existence and the contribution of the people. So if you don't value them, then you don't tell the history. But then if you don't tell the history, you can't value the people. And it goes on and on. It's just unfortunate, because in this very global society in which we live, where we have ready access to information, and we see people move about all the time. And again, we exploit their natural resources a whole bunch. It's very sad that we don't make more of an effort, but it really isn't surprising. And I feel like until we can get a large segment of white America to see the humanity in people of color, we're not going to get very far really with anything. You can enact laws, right? You can do that. It's necessary to have laws. It tells you how to behave, but it doesn't make you adopt a particular value or belief. That
Right.
really does only come through experience and through getting to know people and seeing that they are human, that they feel the same way you do about things. They want the same things that you do, you know. But I think as Americans, we're pretty self-centered, and we have a hard time appreciating the experiences of others. And I think, again, when we look at our immigrant dilemma, right? I don't even want to say like problem, because when you start saying problem, it assigns such a negative light to immigrants. And it's already bad enough that they have to have the word illegal attached to them. But, you know, we can't look at them and say they want the same things that we do, right? They want their families to be safe. They want their families to be healthy. They want their kids to have a chance at a better life. And that's why they come here. They're not coming here to rape us and sell us drugs. And they're really not coming to steal anything from us. They're coming to have a piece of the American dream that we said was available to the whole world, right? And that was why we're supposed to be this melting pot. But we can't see the humanity in those brown people coming from Central and South America. And so we can easily tell lies and half-truths and spread myths and rumor and innuendo that make them seem like they are only here to take advantage of us, that they have traveled all this distance through treacherous terrain to come and rob us, to rob, steal, pillage, and rape. And that's what we tell everyone.
Well, so on this, again, on this Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter thing, maybe we could do something, I don't know, reverse psychology. Remember Brer Rabbit? Please don't throw me in that briar patch, right? Like that's where he wanted to go. So maybe there should be a movement that says white lives matter. And people can go, other people matter too, right? So think about, everyone knows the disparities in the 80s and 90s of punishment, crime and punishment with crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. You could have, I don't know exactly what it was, but for example, 8 grams of powder and, 0.2 of a gram of crack and get criminal time versus the other a pat on the wrist, because cocaine was more of a Wall Street or yuppie thing and more likely to be a white use, and crack was more likely to be inner city. And so the idea was, listen, you're a criminal when you smoke crack, but you're just sort of a yuppie going through a phase when you snort powder, and that's what happens. So they verified it. They verified it in their mind by the disparity in sentencing. Now, it was also treated as a crime, right? So that extreme addiction in the inner cities. Now, as we talk about rehabilitating people, that happened because white lives matter. That didn't happen because people matter. That didn't happen because all lives matter. That happened because white lives matter. When you had this sort of influx of methamphetamines, and it started affecting white people, we started talking about recovery. The opioid crisis, oh my God, right? I mean, it's all valid and real, and we should be doing something about it. But that affected so many more white people that now there's an opioid crisis. When it was crack in the inner city, it was how many people can we stick in the jail system? And that's the difference. It's not just being shot in the back. It's about jobs. It's about families. It's about crime and punishment. If a black person does something, throw them in jail. If a white person does something, oh my God, you're going to destroy his or her life and you're going to destroy their family. Get them help, right? And so because white lives matter already inherently in the system, you have to say that Black Lives Matter to try and get some momentum on that. It's not just being shot in the back. And that's the point I'm trying to make to people as well today. You guys seen the movie A Time to Kill with Samuel L. Jackson and Matthew McConaughey?
Yeah.
So there was a little black girl who was raped and terribly beaten and defecated on and all kinds of stuff. And so Matthew McConaughey, as the lawyer, looks at the jury in the jury box and he says, I want you to close your eyes. And they close their eyes, and he told the story of a little girl walking home innocently from wherever she was walking from, home to see her family and to see her daddy and to jump in his arms, and a group of men drive by in a truck and they yell epithets at her and they grab her and they throw her to the ground and they beat her and they tear the panties from her little body. He was graphic. I won't be that graphic. And they raise her and they thrust inside of her and one goes after the other and then they beat her and leave her as a bloody mess and they leave. And he says, now open your eyes and imagine she were white. And it changed their whole perspective. What do you got, Elisa?
I really wanted to talk about the RNC tonight. I did. I was like, we're going to talk about the RNC tonight. Let's point out some conversations in the RNC that sparked conversation over. And then Wisconsin happened. And then the reaction of Wisconsin happened. And it's like, oh, you got to stop, because at the end of the day, people matter more than politics. People are supposed to matter more than politics. I have a freakishly high pain tolerance. I had a C-section done, and the only pain meds I got were during the C-section. I didn't take any pain meds afterwards. Like, I have a freakishly high pain tolerance. I do not discredit other people when they tell me that they're in pain. I don't know what when someone gets a splinter and they're crying, I don't go, oh, you're a baby. You're a baby. Because I don't understand that pain. I don't know what that would mean, because I don't necessarily react the same way. I don't know what it was like to be molested as a child. I was never molested as a child. I never came close to being molested as a child. But I don't tell people who were molested as a child that they're a victim and that they're using this as a crutch and all of this, stuff. I've never been religiously persecuted. I can say whatever I want religiously, but I don't go to people who have been religiously persecuted and tell them that they're wrong. It's not that hard. You don't have to experience something firsthand to accept that a large group of your Americans, your countrymen, experience something. And you can't pretend it's new. Hold on. Badu, sit! You can't pretend that it's a new thing. As far back as I can remember, having conversations about the different treatment of Black and brown people in our country has been a hot topic. So we can't pretend this is new just because the internet's out and we can videotape it. I watched Rodney King get beaten. And so we have to, as a country, stop. And Kenny, you love saying that there can be two things existing at one time. You cannot be racist while the system that benefits you is racist. Just because that we say that the school system, the medical system, the political system, the police system is systematically racist, that's not me saying that you go out and lynch people in your backyard. But you have to be able to say, this is a big enough issue, and my fellow Americans are being affected by this nonstop. And I have to accept that this must be real. And that's where we need white people to get on board and say, I don't have to agree. I don't have to say I'm a perpetrator, but I can't tell you that as a Black man, Kenny, that you felt attacked by America. You get over it, Kenny. I can't tell you that because I've not walked in your shoes. I can't say that. And that's what you got to stop saying it and stop defending because you feel like you're personally being attacked, and just shut up and listen. Just shut up and listen, or just do nothing. Like, don't do anything, but don't fight it. Don't tell me that he was a criminal. Don't fight it.
Well, so that's the white privilege. That's the arrogance that goes with privilege, right? That it's always about that person. So the people who don't understand or even want to understand or want to listen, it's always about them. Mm-hmm. Whatever you talk about, the issue is about them. They don't understand, so why would you? Get over it. I'm not responsible. So I don't spend a lot of time on them anymore. But as far as the Republican National Convention, I believe that what we're talking about plays right into it, because when you said you can't have a system that does one thing and then you can do another thing, I'm not quite saying how you said it, but if you have a president who says that when young white men walk around with tiki torches and chant, the Jews will not replace us, they didn't say anything that was unclear or that they hinted at, and you could sort of play with the meaning. They said the Jews will not replace us, a woman was run down by a car. We know what happened there, and your president comes out and says there are great people on both sides. He's giving you a freaking license, is what he's doing. He's giving you a license to mess with these people. So at the Republican National Convention, what happens in my mind, in my opinion, which I think I'm right, they said things just to be able to say they could say it. So when you slide into the RNC and they're walking around the issues and talking around the issues, and then they say, oh, by the way, we like all people and we want our African-American friends to be, held. We African-American unemployment. And they just say these things. They say them because they're checking box to say, we're not racist. See, we said this. But for every syllable they uttered that sounded like they were okay, they uttered 1,000 syllables of fear and hate and dog whistles. So it's nonsense. So the truth is, unfortunately, so it was really an afterthought at the Republican National Committee. Hey, grab your guns, be afraid, Mexicans, rioters, looters, wink, wink, black people. But we like African Americans. So it was just sort of covering the bases. So with that said, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I think it's true. I wanted not to believe it for a while, but Donald Trump has done a tremendous job of dividing us to the point where we're kind of at a place now where it really is us versus them and sides. I don't like to admit that, but I think we've gotten there. What do you got, Jay?
I agree. I think that we're on the verge of a race war. And that Republican National Convention.
Real quick. I'm sorry. When I say us as them, I mean people who disagree with his nonsense and people who back him. I don't really mean black and white, but any sort of a race war would be those guys that we talked about before with the ATVs, et cetera. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree. I understood what you meant by us and them. I think that a lot of the speeches, because I went through, I didn't watch it. I didn't want to watch it, but I went back and read the transcripts of some of the speeches, and there was just more. What stood out to me was all of the fear mongering. Like, they just anger and fear mongering. In fact, I want to read this to you because I looked at it and I highlighted it. This was from Trump Jr.'s speech. This is how he ended his speech. He says this. What did I do with it? First he says, this time the other party is attacking, hold on, I just lost it. I'll have to come back to that. I can't find where I have it. At the very end of his speech, he talks about how we're trying to, or when I say why, I am a Democrat, but he says that Biden is going to be taking away your rights. Like, that's how he ends his speech. That's the prevailing message that he wanted to send home at this Republican National Convention, which, first of all, I feel like the convention, when you might talk about the other side, of course, but talk about what you're going to do. Don't sit here and tell everybody about how the other side has come to get you and going to harm you. And that's how he ended his speech. It was incredible. But it was very deliberate. And I think that even Ivanka's speech, while it was a little more positive about her father, there was still more of that message. Those Democrats are going to come and take not only your money and jobs, but your rights and your freedom. And that is a war cry. That's how they're starting this campaign season. It's a war cry.
It's round up the posse and let's go get them, because if you don't, they come to get you. What do you got, Elisa?
Well, you know what? Donald Trump Jr.'s speech, so there were a few lines in Donald Trump Jr.'s speech that I think his daddy...
By the way, you're kind to call it a speech, but go ahead.
Well, there was a few lines that I think his daddy didn't approve, or whoever wrote it didn't realize what he said. There was a line in there where he said that he came from an elite family, which afforded him the best educations in the country, and that excellent lower education and university. And once he says university, shouldn't be afforded to just elite and rich people. Once he says that, that's a democratic thought. But he also says that he also says that racism in our country needs to be ended. He said he had 5 lines that his whole point was we've got to get rid of racism. But then you have all these other speakers. You paraded Herschel Walker up there. You've got all these other speeches where America's not racist. Then you have Nikki Haley. Is Haley her last name?
Yes.
Okay. You have Nikki Haley get up there and say, America is not racist. My brown parents faced discrimination because of their skin and because of what they wore. What the hell did you just say? You just said America's not racist, but now you're telling your stories of how your parents were discriminated against because of their skin color? Like, what are you talking about? And I think that for me, when I talk to people who are Republican and are going to ride or die for a Republican Party or are Trumpers, I just need you to explain to me. And I know it's crazy, but I feel like everybody's going to have, remember Oprah said everybody has their aha moment. Like you always have an aha moment. I have my fingers crossed for a handful of people and they're going to have an aha moment. And it's just when you watch the RNC, I did not watch it all in one sitting. I did watch most of the speeches, or I overheard most of them, or I read the transcripts for most of them. And when you watch them all and you don't see that the entire time, first of all, Trump got up there and is painting this picture of this horrible country where we have protesters in the street and we have people dying in the street. And this is your world. You're the president right now, and you're saying this is what the country's going to be like if Biden becomes president. Have you been here? Have you been here this year? Because this year sucked. And I think that's where we need to. That's what the hard thing is about watching the RNC and not having having people be able to see past what is the cry of the war cry. And it's like, it's aggressive, and see that it's aggressive.
Yeah. So
you know what? I think that there's something that maybe white America should take a look at. The African-American activist, Fannie Lou Hamer, at one point in one of her addresses, she talks about how for Black men in this country, they realized that the country was built on the backs of Black people, on the backs of slaves. And all that they want is the opportunity to have a fair chance and a shot at life like everyone else has. And what she said, and this is not to condone looting or violence, but she said, and of course I can't say it like she did, but she said, if you deny them that, they've said that they're going to come take it. They're going to tear it up, because if they can't have the opportunities that you have, then you won't have these things either. And she said, I don't see why that's so hard for America to understand, right? And this must have been the late 60s that she was saying this. But I mean, again, I don't want to justify violence, but also it's revolution. And that's something that America needs to come to terms with. Instead of just deciding we're so afraid of these animals out there on the street and we all need to get ready, for them attacking us. Like, think about why it's going on. And that is why it's not that people just want to go and be violent, but there's a lot of anger and frustration behind it. And there is no foreseeable end in sight. Yes, and so if they can't have it, if we can't have it, then you can't either. Why should you in this country that you say everyone has equal rights?
So unfortunately, although it looks different and we've had a Black president, a lot of things are the same. It's just less degrading, right? You're not hung from a tree, but you're shot in the back. You don't have a fan tied to your body and beaten and sunk to the bottom of the ocean, of a pond, because they think you whistled at a white woman, but you are a juvenile delinquent at 16 and sentenced to prison with males. It just looks different. And so that's why a lot of the quotes that you can take from people like Fannie Lou Hamer or Malcolm X or H. Rap Brown or Martin Luther King or whomever activists, they still fit today. And so that thing, going back to Elisa's wanting to talk a little bit about the RNC, and I'm going to wrap us up with this. I don't think anyone with a brain can deny what I'm about to say happened there, whether you're for it or against it. This is what happened. We're not talking about an 8th grader reading a list. I'm going to lessen school lunches. I'm going to make PE longer. I'm going to just a list of stuff. There's a list, but everyone running for something. Even 8th grade treasurer has a list. But realistically, they did not talk about any ideas. They talked about what's wrong and who you ought to damn well be afraid of. And to Lisa's point, I was going to say that, and she made it. She started on it. So they gave you clips of what's happening. They literally showed you reels of Donald Trump's America and what's happening under Donald Trump. It didn't happen under Barack Obama. It didn't happen under George Bush. It didn't happen under Bill Clinton. It didn't happen under George Bush. It didn't happen under Ronald Reagan. It didn't happen under Jimmy Carter. Hell, it barely missed Richard Nixon on the heels of civil rights. So Donald Trump has bought this, dare I say, shit back. They showed you reels of his America, what's happening as a result of his leadership, and said to you, by the way, this reels that we're showing you is what's going to happen if Joe Biden becomes president. How much crazier could it get? Be afraid of what's happening now under us, because this is what's going to happen if Joe Biden becomes president. So that's insanity. That's a wrap. If anyone's got anything else to go out on with that.
It is.
All right. So we'll see you same bat place, same bat channel next time. Arrivederci.